We want to talk just a little bit about caregivers, finding caregivers, hiring those caregivers, training those caregivers, and maintaining, keeping those caregivers. And so I want you to go ahead and come on back in. There is a sheet being passed around. A couple of moms are helping to pass out those sheets, one of which is my beautiful wife, Kim. But make sure that you get one of those sheets that Kathy has provided for us. Here's one. Pat?
He's got one, Pat. Oh.
I got one for you. I knew you weren't going to make it back to the last minute. So make sure you've got one of those handouts, and Kathy will kind of walk you through that. So what you see in the three parents here this morning is kind of a spectrum, maybe, of how we've engaged caregivers, and it ranges, and we recognize that that's true for some of you as families as well. So I guess I rudely never really gave an introduction, and I know apparently my picture's not in Bonfire, a description's not in Bonfire, so I'm just this random dude who showed up. And so my name is Todd Robertson. I actually live here in Louisville. We've been here for a little over 22 years. My wife is Kim, and she is in the back, walking that way towards our son Nicholas. And Nicholas is there in the light blue t-shirt. And Nicholas is 22 years old. He actually has a twin brother who is typical. And then they have an older brother, Alec, who is 25. Yay for, was that for Nathan or typical, or I'm not sure what that was a yay for. But yeah, we have, I think in many ways, had a pretty easy journey so far. Now, it's scary for me to sort of say that, because as soon as I say that, maybe it gets really complicated really fast. But we recognize that in many ways there's been a certain simplicity to our lives in the way that we've cared for Nicholas and some of the choices that we've made. And some of that has been because we haven't necessarily had a lot of extra complicating medical issues around his diagnosis or things like that. And some of that is probably just because we've either made or not made choices to somewhat intentionally keep it more simple. And I think that a part of what we want to say is that as we navigate all of these different choices that we have to make as parents, especially as our children become adults, is that we do want to say it's okay for you to make the choices that work for you and your family. I think you've heard that more than once. And I think that we want to keep the best interests of our children at the forefront. We do want them to be able to make the choices to the fullest extent that we can and that they can. But we also recognize then that there's a spectrum of capacity and capability and things like that. Those who are maybe more profoundly or less profoundly affected, and so that affects that. So you really have to kind of map out your path of what you want to do and how you want to handle the care of your adult child. And again, I think that what you're going to see in our conversation here is a spectrum. So for the most part, we have personally provided the overwhelming bulk of the care for Nicholas up to this point. In terms of caregiving, beyond school, so when we left school, which obviously provides an ecosystem of care, and I will say that we were incredibly blessed, and we thank God every day for having the experience that we had in our particular school system. Frankly, it's not just about the school system, and you guys know that. It's often much more about that particular school or that particular classroom or that particular teacher or those particular teachers. But we had great fortune in being in very good schools with very good teachers teachers, schools that had a great culture for kids with special needs. Nicholas was actually prom king a couple of years ago before he left his high school, and so some great situations like that. But beyond that, largely what we've done in terms of caregiving has been mostly respite care. So we have a person who has been with us since she's known Nicholas since she was a teenager in the youth group of the church that I pastored, and she knew Nicholas when he was little, and she has been with us kind of ever since. And so she is the one, basically, we chose her, and she went to the agency that we were assigned, which was very limited here in terms of agencies that would handle the respite care and going through all of the approval processes of who could do that and who could provide that. But anyway, so we sent her to them to say, do whatever they tell you to do to get qualified so that you can be the one who helps with Nicholas. And she is the only one that we have used for our respite care. So it's minute in comparison to some of the care that Kathy is doing, that Pat is doing, but it's an option for you. But it's still significant for you because I think that part of what we've talked about here is the great importance of knowing that you have someone you can trust, right? Especially if your child is largely nonverbal, then knowing that that person is someone that has the best interest of your child. And I think we all would like to have the relationships where we don't feel like we're having to look over somebody's shoulder. We don't feel like we're having to check them. We have to do our due diligence, but so that's kind of the part that we've had. Now the transition that we've made for our daytimes is that we're using an adult day program. So we have an in-house adult day program here that Nicholas has transitioned to. They've got 4 different units in that adult day program, and they sort of have a young adult unit. And so Nicholas is with peers that are mostly his age, some a little bit older, and so that's where he's spending the bulk of his day. Again, I know that that's not for everybody. It's at this moment in time working for us. And I think that's the other thing that we've learned in this process of thinking about caregivers and how we tackle this as a family is that we want to be flexible, or better, I had somebody correct me the other day and said flexible things break. We really need to be fluid because fluid just gets squishy, and as I said earlier this morning, we all know diapers, so we know squishy. So, we know how these things work. And so we're doing and moving through this a little bit open-handedly and recognizing that this is how it is for us right now. This is what we feel like we can handle as a family. We have a strong support system of family. We have a strong support system of our faith community at church. We have friends. We have a good network of people that we're connected to that are able to lend help. And so for now, we're using what we feel like we need and what benefits Nicholas. That may be different at 23 or at 25 or at 28 or at 30 as we get older. And so I just want to maybe introduce this as we're talking about it, and if some of you maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed, and I love the advocacy that both Kathy and Pat have modeled for us for their kiddos and all of that, and appreciate the services that they've been able to do, and they're going to talk more about that. But if you're not there yet, don't freak out and be overwhelmed, okay? If you're trying to sit here right now and envision your angel living in an apartment on their own with a caregiver and all of that, and that just completely freaks you out, I think Pat would agree. It's okay. Just take a deep breath, and it's fine, and you don't have to be there today. And you might not be there tomorrow. And you might not be there at all if that's not the path that you feel like is going to be best for your family and for your angel. That's okay. Okay? I think that we all three would agree that that's okay. And so we have been, again, we're on the narrow end of things. We've been very careful. We've had one kind of primary caregiver for our respite. We now have the day program that we are working with. One thing that I would say, and then I'll stop and let them, because they've got so much more to say to you. One of the things that's key for us is that whoever you're working with, whether it's a particular caregiver, whether it's an organization like our adult day program or something like that, it's all about relationships. Balance that role of being an advocate for your kid and also building relationships, knowing the stressors that are there for your caregivers and the people that are helping and things like that. My wife is an incredible baker, and she bribes with cookies and cupcakes and things like that on a regular basis. I know that people love Nicholas deeply, but I think they really also love the stuff that Kim bakes on a regular basis. And so we are not at all above bribing with baked goods at every opportunity to nurture those relationships and get to know those folks. And really, very few folks are drawn into this line of work that don't have a heart for it. Those usually weed themselves out pretty quickly. And so I think that we can respect and honor and appreciate them and encourage them. For over the years, therapists and things like that have just become a part of our family, and we've gotten to know them. And when we've had those times of separation from pediatrician or from a therapist or something like that, it has been heartbreaking because they do feel like a part of the family. So recognize their value, build on those relationships, encourage them as you can. Balance that advocacy and recognition that they're such a key component, and that the happier they are and the stronger that relationship, the better care they're going to give. And I think that you'll find that you navigate the waters a little easier. So, all right, so Kathy is going to share a little bit now and kind of walk you through the sheet, and then Pat will share some. And you want to do it from down there or up here? Of course.
This just seems so official to me, standing up here. We started out our supports like my co-presenter did. We started out with respite, and we do not bribe the children's care providers. We positively reinforce them for good behavior. So this seminar is how to find, hire, and retain support staff. This is not something that I just, the information just popped into my head and I just knew. We started out with an agency-based model, and the supports coordinator was the one that really taught me how to treat support staff, because I waited until my oldest Amanda was 10 to get any support in the house, and I felt like nobody could do a better job than me. And the third provider we hired, who is still a part of the family, almost 20 years later, she was bound and determined to prove to me that she could do just as good as I did, or even better. And don't tell her I said this, but she far surpassed me. So how to find support staff. Finding support staff is a challenge. You are always on the lookout. If you're in the grocery store and you see somebody that, they just have a look to them, and you think, I want her to work with Amanda, or I want her to work with Angela. My son does prefer male providers, which are even harder to come by. So we are always on the lookout in public for people that we think do a good job. What we don't do is we don't take them from their existing job, because we don't want to set that up as a model for somebody. If they happen to quit and then they want to work for the kids, that's a different story. So where do we find support staff? Since we're not an agency-based, it is up to my husband and I and lead support staff, when we have one of those, to find the staff. So, historically, I've placed an ad on Craigslist. The last 3 times I used Craigslist, I didn't really get a great response. I'm getting really good responses from local Facebook groups. There's a Facebook in Michigan. There's a group called Bay County Resources. I post help wanted ads on there. That's where I've gotten most of the kid support staff. Word of mouth is always a good place. Jackie Golden was kind of my mentor, and she kind of held my hand through getting the support services and organizing them and developing them. She said, use your network. Use your network of people and hire people that know and love the kids. And I thought to myself, anybody I know, they're not going to want to work for the kids. They have other goals in life. But because, she knew way more than I ever will, I took her word, I took her advice and offered, a friend a job, and she took it. And she was with us for 6 years. So, don't discount your circle, because your circle is, if my friend didn't want that job, she knew somebody who did. People know people. And when you hire support staff, your friends and your support staff, they start to love your kids, because our kids they're lovable. They want to help. They want to look for support staff. So your friends will be on the outlook for support staff. A student, so every college has like a placement, a job placement area. I've never signed up for that, but I know a few parents who have signed up with their local colleges as an employer, because if you go under the self-determination initiative, your child is their own employer. So they have the federal ID number, they have all the paperwork that they need. So you can register with colleges if you live around one, and that's a great resource, especially a college that has a speech program, an OT program, a physical therapy program, or behavioral psychology. Those are great places. You get students, you get them fresh, you get them before they have any preconceived notions, so you can train them like you want them to be trained. Newspaper ad, I did that one time about 1.5 years ago, and I got one person. Word of mouth, I think, is really the best way to go. We live very rural. We don't live near a city, so word of mouth really gets us a lot of our support staff. So we have the option, even though we're in the self-determination program, we have the option to split the kids' hours. We can do half of their hours through a staffing agency, where we don't have to find the staff. We don't have to hire them in. We just say yes or no. So you can always do that as an option if you choose self-determination. And an agency is a good option to use. My husband and I, even the last year, we've gone back and forth about utilizing an agency. We choose not to do that, but just because we think, we can find support staff. How to train support staff. Again, I had a caseworker from a staffing agency teach me how to do it. I just kind of thought that they would come in and know what to do. That didn't happen. She was the one that taught me I need to model what I want the providers to do. Tell them, show them, tell them again, and then watch them do it. One of the hardest parts I had to learn to accept was not everybody is going to do things like I do. I wanted them to do things exactly like me, but they do have their own way, they have their own gifts, they have their own skills. As parents, we need to recognize those skills that are different than we have, and let the provider kind of find their own road. That doesn't mean don't step in if you see something that needs to be corrected. Let the provider know. So in training a new support staff, I tell them the worst of the worst. We have really good days around our house usually. 3 kids with Angelman Syndrome, now that they're older, is not what you think it would look like. It's actually pretty calm. The older they get, the more they calm down, the more support staff works with them, the more independent they get. But we still have those times that, a cup is going to get thrown across the kitchen and land in the dining room. Providers need to know that's going to happen, because that will happen. Tell them, what they might face as far as behaviors go. But I try to always, when I give them the list, I try to end on the positive things, because I don't want the new provider to face the negative things. I don't want them to think, oh my gosh, I might have to, duck a dodge a plate today. I want them to think that, if I positively reinforce Amanda, she's going to drink today. Things like that. I try to be very positive with them, and I think that works pretty well. Even though I don't expect a provider to do things exactly like I do expect them to shadow me for a few days, because there's certain things. My kids are on a routine. There's a certain way that you toilet Amanda. There's a certain way that you toilet Angela. No girl toilets Rocky. He doesn't like that. He likes Amanda to do that. But my kids have been on a routine-based day for so long that provider needs to know their routine. I show them no less than 3 times. I know that sounds extreme, but it is what it is. I show them 3 times, and then I watch them do it. And then I stand outside the door for a few times and watch them do it. And if I'm not doing it, their staff people are. We do retain long-term support staff. The longest one I've had working for us has been 10 years. She left for a year, and then she decided to come back. We usually hire once every other year. And I think it's because we treat them like they're people. They're not servants. They're not there to, for me to boss around. There's no I in team. I look to even new support staff for advice. Not necessarily for the kids, because they don't know the kids, but everybody has skills that you can utilize in a self-determination program. Our one girl that's been with us for a long time, my son he's having lower GI problems. He's going for a colonoscopy on Monday. We got the colonoscopy kit while my husband and I were here, and she is doing her thing. She's making sure that Rocky gets what he needs, and my husband and I don't have to be there. That's what you want out of a support staff person. And it's hard not to think to yourself, I should be home doing this. What is wrong with me? I should be home doing this. But realistically, Rocky's 18 years old. If he were, a typically developing person, I wouldn't be doing it for him. So there's a mind frame that also goes with having support staff like that. It's okay to let them do their job. That took me a long time to realize, because I felt like if I wasn't there all the time, I didn't go on vacation for 5 years when we first got support staff, because I felt like if I wasn't there, I wasn't being a good parent, because my kids have a disability. It took somebody gave me a good talking to make me realize that, a good parent can leave their kids with support staff, and honestly, sometimes they do a better job than I do. Just kind of food for thought. That's something I really had a hard time dealing with. But I got over it. Let them find their own way. Just because they don't do things like I do them, it doesn't necessarily make it wrong. Give the provider independence once they catch on, but be close just in case they have a question, just in case a behavior arises that is unexpected. We all know people with Angelman syndrome, a behavior can get extinguished, and then 10 years later, for some reason, and it doesn't seem to be any trigger, that behavior can come back. So when you have a new support staff person, whether it's an agency or you're doing self-determination, always be close at the beginning if they have questions. Even now, my kids are in Michigan, we're in Kentucky, my husband has his phone on him. The providers know we are never too busy for a text. We will always answer a text or a phone call if we're available to. So let that provider know that you're in it too. You are working hand in hand with them. The only encourage questions. The only stupid question is one that's not asked. And I find that when I do these seminars, I will, tell parents, if I'm in the middle of something and you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, Billy. Just like that. Because if you have a question, other people in the audience also have that same question. I love Billy. And don't assume that they know what to do. I've hired people that I've interviewed, they have all kinds of experience. One person even had experience in Angelman syndrome. So I mistakenly assumed she knew what to do. Every household is different, every client is different. Don't assume that they know what to do. You might be telling them something that they already know, but to take that chance, and hearing something 2 or 3 times isn't necessarily a bad thing. Do you have any questions about how to train support staff? Any problems you yourself have run into? Yes. Is that okay?
There we go. So we've had in-home support staff come, and we've discovered and pretty much pinpointed that my daughter, she's 21, deletion positive, and is really keen on my attention in particular. And she's the oldest of 7 children, so she's had a lot of opportunity to reestablish herself as the youngest child over and over again. Yes. And when we have support staff come in, that idea of modeling the behavior, immediately support staff get shoved. Like,
Yes.
no, I only want mom.
Yes.
And then if support staff is trying to do their job and I'm trying to hang in the background, if she can see me, knows I'm in the house, it's war. So typically when we had in-home support staff, I had to go find somewhere to be
Right.
for a few hours. And so we found that the only way to communicate really was through the cell phone. And I'm wondering, when you talk about self-determination, do you still use a case manager?
We use a case manager through Community Mental Health, who provides the waiver services for Michigan.
Okay, and then all of the individual support services, those are what you organize finding and staffing?
Yes.
All of those
Okay,
things.
so yes, sometimes. I used to. And then we hired a lead staff person because, like Pat pointed out, I'm not going to be around forever. And this program needs to be able to be run independently of me. So yes, we had a lead staff person that would train.
Does that person stay with you? I mean, is that somebody also that you have to rehire and
The lead staff
retrain?
person?
Yes.
No. No. Our lead staff person was a person that was with us for 10 years. So it was just a natural progression. We haven't tried a lead staff person again. So what we decided to do, because the lead staff person kind of gave that person in that position a lot of power. And it kind of went to her head, which surprised me. She's always been so humble. So what we do now is we have an overnight girl that faxes in payroll for the providers. I still have to sign the timesheets. My husband actually does the scheduling for the providers. The staff person that's been with us for 10 years, who was our lead staff person, she is still with us. She is the one that does medication refills, takes the kids to go get their own medication, does any medical stuff. She was a CNA, so it just kind of naturally progressed. So, but to this day, if we hire somebody, and this is why people like Ashley, the girl that's been with us for 10 years, is invaluable, because if I am at home, my oldest Amanda is clung to me. I don't know if she would have been like that. What I can tell you is that it was her and I for 10 years, and only her and I and my husband for 10 years. Rocky and Angie, they transitioned much better to another provider, but I have to leave the house to this day. So I can let the staff person feed Amanda, but I've got to stand behind Amanda if she sees me. I've got to stand behind Amanda with my hands on her shoulders so she knows I'm there. And I thought, well, this is a waste of time. Why don't I just let the provider go? But over the course of the years, because she's now 28, now I can kind of leave the room. She knows I'll be back. That took a long time. But now I can be home and she's good with her provider. I just have to reassure her.
Oh, I had a question about that too. If you've got a lead provider, that means you would have possibly 2 employees there at the same time? I mean, there can't be any overlap, right?
That you're correct. There cannot be any overlap. This is where I think that Pat could shed some light on it, because I think she has a different situation than I do, but I don't know that to be sure. We have more than one provider because we have 3 kids on home and community-based services. So a lot of people think that we're unfortunate because we have 3 kids with Angelman syndrome, and that can be a rough road, but we're kind of fortunate because usually a provider doesn't work alone. So there is, you kind of learn these things as you go along, and we're still learning. There is a code that we learned that a provider can put down that they're training somebody under the home and community-based services. What's the code Ashley puts down, do you know? What does she have to write? Training?
Vary by state, though? Yeah. I don't think you can do that in Kentucky.
That would vary by state, but as long as my kids have had home and community-based services, we just recently found out about this. And it was by a new case manager who didn't know not to tell us. So that's how we found that out. And that's where your DD Council, your Parent Training Information Center, your ARC is invaluable, because those are the agencies that are going to tell you these ins and outs that you're not going to know.
Can I say something?
Sure?
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
How are you? I'm Marissa Grover.
I know.
You know who I am.
know.
We've talked a couple times. It's very interesting because every state is very different. So the last conference I went to was in Chicago 4 years ago, and I went home and I was like, yay, I want to not have to go through an agency, right? So we live in Indiana, and so I went back and I went to the ARC and I went to my case manager, I went to all these people, and the long and short of it is, in Indiana, I have to go through an agency. I can't be my own provider. So for us, there are different models of providers. There are what you're talking about, the self-determination versus like a staffing agency. And we have the same, like we go through the self-determination route because I'm a nurse myself. I work in respite, pediatric respite. And what they tell me when I call in, I say, hey, I need a shift on Monday from 8 to 5. You know, who do you have? Well, I have Sarah. She lives at 455 Smith Street. Be there at 8. That's all they tell you. So I quickly decided that, you know, I was going to have to find my own people. And my mom and I were just talking about how you keep them, how you find them. And then, you know, like you were saying, you train, you watch them, but then you have certain people that you know just click and they get it.
Yep.
And then you have other people that really, really, really want to help you, and they really, really, really want to help your child, but it's just not going to work. And that's the part that's hard for me, is like, ooh, I hired you, I picked you, I chose you, and now you can't do the job. So that's where it gets a little tricky. And like, what's the time frame? Like, it seems like if you let that go on too long with our kids, then they develop behaviors with that provider, and then it spills over to all these other providers, and then everybody's like, what's going on with JR? Why is he biting me? Yeah, because the other girl's not following our behavior plan. She's screaming at him. You know, then that's when you know, like, it's time to go. But I really wish that we didn't have to go through an agency, because I do all their work. They just sign the paycheck, right? Because I find my people, I train my people.
So you don't have the option of self-determination?
No,
I didn't.
no. So I have to use their forms, their binder. No, it's not in Indiana. I know it's in Kentucky because I heard about it through Eric and Debbie Wright. But we do not have that as far as I know, but it would really be nice, because how much money is my agency taking from my son's budget? That's the bottom line.
That's right.
And really, that's all they're doing. So they say, well, we hire the primary caregiver as the house manager, house supervisor. That's me. But they don't pay me anything.
That's right.
You know, so I have to make sure that everybody's timesheets are faxed in, that, you know, they have all their respite notes and they're tracking their goals the way they're supposed to. So I'm doing it all, but then my agency writes the check, and then they get money in their pocket. So I don't like that.
They should have a case manager through that agency making sure that your providers are doing those respite notes.
Yeah, loosely, they do. Loosely, they do. But I really do all of that. So it's just frustrating. I would love to hear more, like, so you're in Michigan, I know Kentucky has it. Is anybody from Ohio having this kind of setup? I don't know. You know, it's just so different from state to state.
Well, and as Brandon said, I think this is why it's important to really try to kind of keep up with these things, and whether it's through the ARC or one of the
Right.
councils or something like that, because this is really a moving target. A lot of the waiver programs are shifting right
Right.
now. So like I just recently found out that in Kentucky, it's not just certain waivers, because like the Michelle P. waiver, which as you heard this morning from one of the presenters, has a waiting list of over 6,000. It's not just the Michelle P. waiver that's the consumer-driven option, but now you can kind of, it's like a la carte. So we have a home and community-based waiver, but we can also do some of our services self-directed, and then some of the services through the agency, more like what you're describing.
that's nice.
So things are really shifting, and I hate to, again, say that you have to become an expert at one more thing other than genetics and all of the other things that you do, but this is one of those areas that we really have to be diligent with, whether, you know, through a partner agency or just on our own, figuring out what's the waiver system right now?
Right.
What's changed in the last year? What's changing? What changes are coming up? To really be looking through that. You might have your Health and Family Services state agency, like ours has a thing where you can sign up for the email list, and any changes that are going on, discussions that are going on about waivers at the state level, you know, I get an email saying, hey, this is a new change, this is news coming out. So we just have to really keep up.
Can I add one thing? Is also, I found it really helpful not to think about the support that I needed right now when JR was 10, but to think long-term. So in our state, it was the same way. He was on a wait list for 12 years to get on this Bureau of Developmental Disabilities waiver, and they offered us $16,000 for care, and I said, no, that's not going to work. And you could only get the bigger dollars if it was an emergency, and it really wasn't an emergency, but I applied for it and we got it. So 5 years later down the road, nobody can get it. That money doesn't exist. So in your state, you find out whatever the biggest waiver and the biggest dollars, and you go for it. That's what I think. I mean, that's just my opinion. Get what you can get now, because
That's right.
now they're telling people group home in Indiana. No, I'm sorry, you can't have the community-based waiver. They're pushing group homes in Indiana.
And that's an important thing, is you don't want to sound, I don't want this to sound bad, but, you know, get what you can get. If they offer you 20
Take it.
hours a month, the rest of it, which, you know, and at the beginning, that's what we had, 20 hours a month, we took it. And now my kids have 24/7 support staff, but that took, you know, well, Amanda's 28, so that would be 18 years. Took us 18 years to get to this point, because it's just been in the last 2 years that they've had 24-hour support staff. And even though my girls were adults, my son was almost 18, getting that overnight support staff was difficult. And I have a good relationship with my CMH, or for the most part. And I still had to. You know, I had a husband that passed away in 2014, and he did nights when he was alive with the kids. I did days, he did nights. That system got screwed up when he passed away. And, you know, I asked for overnight support, and the case manager looked at me and said, so what you're telling me is you can't take care of your kids. And you know, I try to be diplomatic, and you know, I said that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I am up day and nights. I'm having a hard time retaining daytime support staff. I can't leave them alone at night. All 3 kids have seizures. You know, they have no safety awareness. They can leave the house at any time. They know how to unlock the door. And she left that day, and I didn't have support staff. So it's definitely building blocks. Whichever avenue you choose to take, start building those blocks when your kids are young, because I don't think it happens overnight.
With your self-determined plan, what's your backup? I mean, what if somebody's sick that day? What if somebody's in a car wreck and nobody shows up for their thing? What do you do?
That's a good question, and that is, those are policies that we have implemented as of last year. So let's say we have our providers, now that Amanda's no longer in school, they work 12-hour shifts. So provider Ashley will work 3 12-hour shifts 3 days in a row. So if she can't show up to work, she has to start calling her coworkers, and one of those coworkers have to cover that shift. So if they can't cover a 12-hour shift, they're going to have to start talking to each other. And I don't care if somebody can work the first 6 hours or the second 6 hours. Another person can come in, they could split that shift. One person doesn't have to work 12 hours. They have to get that shift covered, and if they don't, they have to come into work. I am a little bit more lenient when we're home, but if we're not home, like we're not home this week, somebody has to cover that shift. And we only keep team players. If we have somebody who continuously won't cover somebody's shift, we can't keep them employed there, because that makes the people that have been with us for a long time, who give it their 100%, that makes them feel like, because they told me, Kathy, I cover every shift, this person doesn't cover any of them. They still have a job. Well, I can't look at that person and say, you're right, you're kind of, up the lake with no paddle. That's the best way I can put that. So I don't keep those people that kind of slack. It's not fair to the providers, so, yes.
So are your caregivers then coming out of the respite budget? Or
Can you use the microphone? People can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question was, is the care providers coming out of the respite budget? And that's an excellent question. The providers for the daytime come out of their community living supports budget. My kids actually, they don't get respite anymore. They used to, and then it got all transitioned to CLS for some reason. I'm not even sure why, including night staff. So I don't know, but yeah, it comes out of their CLS funds.
What is CLS?
What is CLS? CLS is Community Living Supports. And that is for any activity of daily living that the provider is teaching your child, at least in Michigan. So if my son's provider, who's a male, takes him out to the grocery store to get his medication, that's a community living support, because they're working on activities of daily living, which we call ADLs. Did that answer your question? Okay, good. I'm like hogging the microphone here.
Want me to speak to him?
Sure. I'll hand it over to Pat.
So we do work with an agency, and I work with an agency for the reason that self-determination is not in full gear in California. So we went to the IPP meeting and said, this is what we need, these are the services, these are the coverage we need, and that's how we got our $90,000, $100,000 budget. But it is managed, the federal money comes down, is matched at our regional center, which is then sent to the ARC of San Francisco. The ARC of San Francisco is the vendor. They are the hiring agency for the staff. Of course, nobody gets hired if they don't go through me and Joseph. So this started with me when Joseph was in school. So apparently I don't have the scruples that Kathy has, because I do steal them from other agencies. When Joseph was in school, I wanted one-to-one aides. And they were saying, well, we don't do that, and you can't hire your own person, and we have a placement agency, Pat, and we do the placing, and you don't do the placing. And I said, yeah, okay, fine. School union, paraprofessionals, and all that kind of stuff. Joseph was in an after-school program that served people with developmental disabilities, and I knew that the school district paid a lot more money than that after-school program, and I needed a one-to-one aide. And so I stole that person to come interview at Joseph's school. And this was what I was starting inclusion in San Francisco at the time. They didn't know that, but I was. And got her to go, and of course, the union rules said that she had to go interview with the principal, and the principal has to okay them. Well, of course, there was a list of other people who wanted to be paraprofessionals at the time, and I went to the principal ahead of time, and I said, well, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. I said, you're going to get a list of the interviewees, and you're going to go through them, and this is the one, and she's probably the last one on the list. I will reject all of them for whatever reason I can come up with, and you will hire this one. So they hired Kelly. Kelly was Joseph's one-to-one aide for 4 or 5 years through the school district. And she got the benefits of being a part of a paraprofessional. She got the pay, she got the coverage. It was great for her, it was great for us. She also ended up becoming a part of our family. All of us were in her wedding when she got married, the entire kit and caboodle of us. And she went on vacations with us. She did our 20 hours of respite some of the time because paraprofessionals could go in and out at 8:30 to 2:30 or 8:30 to 3:30. She could cover the other sessions or weekends or whatever I needed her for, and she did that and made money on it through being paid by the regional center. So that's how I got her. I also ended up then in high school. It was obvious that Joseph needed male supervision or males around him more. They were going into locker rooms in high school, and I wasn't going to send Kelly into a male locker room. And I wasn't going to send Joseph into the girls' locker room. So those were things that we made choices about, and so I started hiring. Well, they hired them, but I did steal them from the same after-school program. So it's interesting because Kelly ended up marrying the HR director of the after-school program, and which means, I guess, no hard feelings. But that was where I ended up getting my contacts of people and who you know to hire for assistance, personal assistance. The idea was that Joseph was going to need one-on-one for the rest of his life. I knew that. I wanted him to be fully included in school, so I started with the one-to-one business a long time ago. And when he moved out, that was the same concept for me. We had the advantage of him being authorized to have an overnight staff 24/7 to live with him for free in that apartment that I mentioned earlier. And therefore, that was a pretty good draw for a college student to come and live and need a place to stay for nothing. Of course, the deal is we wrote a contract with that overnight staff person that they were in charge of all emergencies, and they had to do weekends, et cetera, and so forth. And if they wanted IHSS money, then they needed to do the medications, and they needed to do all the personal hygiene and all the other things that were necessary. They had to go to Costco and buy the big rolls of toilet paper and paper towels and keep the house stocked with the big stuff that Joseph wasn't shopping for. And that was part of our deal, and he could use some of the IHSS hours to supplement his college career. That ended up working very well. So I went up to I had gone up to USF. They also have volunteer programs. USF is a Jesuit school, and so they have Jesuit volunteer programs where people can get community service hours for doing those kinds of things, or they can come and get paid. Joseph, even though he has someone who lives in with him 2 nights a week, we have a relief companion, overnight companion that comes in. Right now, the current guy comes in on Wednesday and Thursday nights, so that Jordan, who's the overnight staff, doesn't have to stay there 7 nights a week all the time. But Jordan lives in that apartment, so if he doesn't show, if the daytime staff, who is employed by the ARC of San Francisco, doesn't show up, Jordan's on duty. And he knows whatever he has decided to do with his life. He's a videographer and a film editor on his side life. No matter what happens, he drops everything and he has to cover a shift. He has opted, because it's financially advantage for him, to do like 2 or 3 shifts for Joseph now a week. So he does, I think, Monday through Wednesday, 8:30 to 2:30, and then from 2:30 to 9, which we used to call the nanny shift, because it was coming home from a day of wherever he'd been out in the community, he comes home and he had to go out to Safeway or Trader Joe's, which is across the street, and shop for dinner, come home and cook dinner and da-da-da with his staff. And there was a lot more of just household routine kinds of things. A lot of the in-house goals that he has for his daily living skills. Out in the community is just being cool and being out in the community, for the most part. So I did look for college students to come because I also wanted people that were more age appropriate. If you're looking for housing options, and that's going to be talked about later in the afternoon, any of the housing options I was looking at for group homes or what have you, people were old. They were older than I was. And first of all, I don't want Joseph living with them. And second of all, he doesn't want to live with them. He wants to live with peers. So that's why I tried to target people that were more age appropriate or closer in his age group. Au pairs who had aged out of their family. A lot of us who may know friends who had au pairs that were there, and they are now no longer, the kids are too old and they don't have a job as an au pair anymore, but they want to go back to college. Well, they could go to college and be Joseph's attendant very well. I was looking for men all the time because Joseph had fired all the women. And so it was harder to find the right guys. Church groups that you might be involved with, Todd mentioned that, those are often, they have auxiliaries, they have women's groups, they have youth groups, and a lot of them will have to do, even the high school students who have to do community groups, or college students who have to do community service or want to do community service, were a great resource for me. I think when it comes to training, the first thing I did is, during the interview process, the first thing I wanted to know was that person. Who are you and what are you doing interviewing for this job? Because people don't do anything just for the money or because this is going to be the funnest job of your life. There's some self-interest, and you need to know more about that person. So I had to find out and that's why I mentioned to someone else earlier today that I found that the people that were interested in working for Joseph, because Joseph is the employer, were people that were very artistic, very much involved with music and photographers, and the skateboarder dude I mentioned earlier. They were really, and they introduced that to Joseph's life, which were things that I knew Joseph already liked. I had a guy who was studying to be a doctor. He was in med school, but he was a big guy. He was about 6'4" and very strong, and he knew how to swim. And he's the only staff person I've ever been able to, who took Joseph swimming a couple days a week. Joseph can swim by himself, but I mean, you don't send him to the pool by himself. But you need to be somebody who's strong, who has life-saving skills, who can save himself as well as Joseph at any point in time. So those were things I found out when I was interviewing. So the first thing I want to know about anybody is, why are you looking at this job? Who do you know in the disability community? What's your experience? And have you ever done anything personal, especially for the men? Not to be sexist about this, ladies, but there is something called maternal instinct, and I haven't heard a lot about the guys that really want to change diapers or do anything like that. Now, Joseph doesn't wear diapers, but he has to be showered, and you have to make sure he can shower well. And somebody needs to know how to check those pits and privates and make sure everything's clean. And you asking that of a man is an interesting thing. So I was perfectly happy and very comfortable talking about personal male things. I learned that when he was in high school. And learning how to understand the male psyche as he's going through the high school years. And so you needed to be able to talk to that person comfortably as an employer, as Joseph's co-employer, and be able to get some feedback and then you know whether or not they get it. Because you start talking about, they start squirming in their seat and going like this, and I don't know, and I'm going, you're out of here. So that's not working. We talked about routines. So routines are very important, and I think a lot of kids with Angelman, actually a lot of us like routines. You know, if your sleep routine is off or you're doing something, we all get off. So we went through a lot of, when we go through a training, the first thing we do is behavior training, and the second thing we do is training on routines. Behavior training is something people don't understand. People do not know that a lot of the bad behaviors that are going on are being reinforced by us, and that we need to own them, and we need to understand and try to interpret the functional communication of whatever that behavior is. The regional center in San Francisco gave me a behavior. She came to my house once a week for like a year and a half. And positive discipline and behavior management skills became my new religion. I spoke to families about it all the time. I brought it into the school systems to teach families how to understand what the behavior was and what the communication was from this behavior. So behavior training is key to a lot of our kids. And so that's the first thing. After I've gone through the initial interest, I start teaching them about Angelman syndrome and the behaviors. And this is Joseph's language. This is how he signs and tells you things. This is what he feels like when he's good, bad, upset. And you need to be able to understand that. And then they started being more open with me, saying, well, this is what he's doing today. Is that weird? And then I'd say, oh no, well, that probably means this. And then we'd expand that, and we do try and keep a record of it so that everybody knows how Joseph's communicating with everybody. But I do think that we are in a crisis in this country for our direct support staff. They're not available. They don't want to be there. They're not paid enough. Nurses' aides in nursing homes get paid a lot more. The ARC of the United States and a lot of us as advocates are fighting for certification for just direct support staff. And I think it's something that has to happen for us to be able to hire, maintain, credential, and train people and raise the standard. But we haven't been able to do that yet. The paraprofessionals in the school district, they have a certification, and they were therefore paid accordingly. Nurses' aides in a nursing home have a certification, but a direct support staff, I can hire that college student right off the street, go through a few zippity-doo-dahs, and they've got a job. But how do you put that on a resume? If I read that on somebody's resume, anyone outside of our community won't know what that is. And they don't know what hard work it is, and how important and personal it is. So it's important to put my plug in here for advocacy for certification for direct support staff, because I know they don't get paid enough anywhere in this country. And who gets paid and how they get paid, who hires them. The woman who was asking about the agency, whoever is doing you're doing all the work for the agency and they're not doing anything. Well, I would have a talk with that people, because that's just ridiculous. I mean, the ARC of San Francisco, they have a team person, and if anybody doesn't show up for a staff, they call her. And if she can't find somebody, she actually has to show up. So she's the one that will be there. And I'm the next layer outside of that. But I do think that agencies, you're not going to find self-determination in every state. But if you can get a budget, I think getting the most you can is a good thing. You probably learned that lesson when you were in school system. You always described your child with the most adjectives that would create the most fear in any school district, and describe the most needs so that you could get all the services you needed. And those were the cornerstones to moving into adult life. Because now you have a record of all the services you needed for all those years while you were in the school system. And then you could say, okay, I had a one-to-one aide from 5th grade through high school, and you're not going to give me a one-to-one? I don't know. That's not going to work. He needs a one-to-one 24/7. And sometimes they've offered us day programs. Joseph doesn't work well in a small group. He might go to a drum class at the ARC once in a while, but for the most part, he wants to be out on his own, running his own life. And he enjoys that. And if you put him in a classroom with a bunch of people, I think he did go to a gospel choir class in City College for 3 years. That was hysterical. I loved it. And I said, they used to tease me, this professor, he said, this kid's been in my class for 3 years. Because it's amazing. Who puts a nonverbal kid in a gospel choir class? But I'll tell you, when they started singing, Joseph would make his noise. And it was a joyful noise. It would make you cry. But music was something that was important to him. And that's how I hire the staff, because what's important to Joseph is important to me, which is important to how we're going to hire anybody. So you have to start with those sources. So if you have a music school, if you have people, students are poor. And you're getting out of the school system, you're talking about age 20s and 30s. You need to find a poor student. And they'll do anything for you. But if you have a poor music student, you probably have something that they have in common with your kid. And that's really, really important. I know that it has made a huge difference to Joseph and his life. And when staff leave, you can tell the behavior changes. When Ben, the skateboarder, left, we had 2 weeks of mourning. His iPad we took many iPad videos with him, and he still goes back and puts them on. Joseph takes his own videos. Sometimes they're just up his nose. But for the most part, with the ones that were made of Ben, he can find them out of the 2,000 videos he's got, and he'll just go back and he misses him. But there was a transition we made for every time we hired somebody and every time somebody had to leave, one way or the other. If they were fired, he didn't miss them too much. And so whatever problem was going on, which was probably how we knew we needed to make Peter leave stage left. Peter left stage left because Joseph's behavior had gone crazy, and he was nesting, so he'd take all of the sheets off the bed and he'd sleep in the corner by the bed. Or he started having other pounding, hitting behaviors, you knew. And so those are the kinds of things, that's how we assess it. And that's why we have team meetings, so that the staff feel supported. And that was the other most important thing. That's what we've had. In the 19 years Joseph has lived in his apartment, I've only had 4 live-in attendants. That's not bad at all. Right. They've rotated through. They've become part of our family. My daughter got married 3 weeks ago, and 2 of the old attendants who had been part of Joseph's team years ago, I said, okay, Joseph's coming to Sarah's wedding. You 2 are bringing him, please. I paid him to bring him. They knew, but they had also become part of my family. So I said, can you come to Sarah's wedding with Joseph? You're his escort. Because I was going to be mother of the bride, and I'd like to be mother of the bride without Joseph attached to my hip or my arm or whatever else. And so that's exactly what we did, and it was great. But those are the bonds we've made through all these years. And so those are my hints on how to find staff.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
For those of you that are hiring your own staff, do you have any form of background check? Like, when you hire somebody, a student off the street, and I know you go through an agency after you hire them, right?
Well, I work with the agency to actually hire them too. So, I'm doing the interviewing with Joseph and the team leader at the ARC. And so in order to get the job, I give the nod, and then they fill out the paperwork, and they are certified and bonded through the ARC.
Through the ARC, okay.
So I don't have to do that. And if they, so they could also cover, that way they can cover each other's shift, because if they aren't, and they also have to do the same things they would normally do for IHSS, if they're going to ever do an IHSS shift, which is only the overnight or the 2-night relief. And that way they all have the same.
But they have some background check so that they've
Yeah, we do,
they've checked
the
registries and...
Well, any agent, well, I should never make it a generalization, okay, the other lady said there was something crazy going on in her agency. Yeah, we have background checks, fingerprinting, the whole bit. We have references that people check, and I do find it hysterical, because you put references on, so I say, okay, give me a reference you wouldn't give,
Yeah.
Where's your mother?
Right.
Those kinds of things that you want to talk about. So we do check the references. It's amazing when people apply for jobs, how many do not ever check references.
Right.
So trust me, we do.
All right. Was worried about
Because if
hiring.
you put your brother or your mother on there, they're going to say nice things about you. You have to know, who is this reference? And yeah, you have to know how to do that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think if you're doing that on your own, always ask a reference if they can give you another reference of someone who would know that candidate. That's good if you're hiring anybody anyway. Okay, we have maybe time for one more question. I don't want to stand between you and lunch. Again, with the question? Yeah? All right. Go ahead.
If you are hiring these people and they're taking your child out into the community, are they using your vehicle, or are you providing a vehicle for them to use with your children? Or are they using their own vehicle? Does that count towards monies? Like if they're using their own vehicle and you're doing mileage, does that count towards your monies that are being given to you for their care?
All right. So included in the kids' home and community-based service is a mileage budget. So they get reimbursed the federal mileage rate, which is what? 55 cents or 50 cents or something a mile, which more than covers their mileage. So the providers prefer to take their own cars because they get reimbursed mileage. If they don't have a vehicle, okay, so before they got mileage, the providers would take my minivan and take the kids around, and I would put gas in that, in my car for that. So, yeah, some providers prefer not to use their own car. Most prefer to use their own car. But I let them know, you know what, there's a very good possibility if you take any of my children out, 1, 2, or all 3, your car will not come back in the same condition that it was left in. So, just to let you know.
We don't use vehicles. We did when he first moved out, because the guy I had hired was part of I'd known him for years, and so, but there's a liability issue. And San Francisco, we're not rural, so he loves riding, and all the bus drivers know him. I can't tell you how many people. So all the bus drivers know him, the cable cars, and so he's on Muni all the time, getting wherever he's going to go. He walks along, and he's in Fisherman's Wharf, so he can walk everywhere through Chinatown and whatever. But I do pay for anything the staff want to do with Joseph, because the staff is underpaid to begin with. So if they want to go see a movie, a movie's $10. And all of the, anything he gets into, like the Academy of Sciences or the aquarium or what have you, he has a disability pass, so his attendant is allowed to go with him. His attendant's allowed to go on Muni, so the Muni's not paying for that either. He's not paying for that. Joseph's not paying for it. It's all in his pass. But I do pay for the movie, for the staff. So it encourages people to do things. If they want to take the ferry over to Alcatraz, or go, over to Larkspur and go shopping, or just go to the park somewhere, they hop on and off, and it's going to cost. And these staff, I don't expect them to pull 10 or 20 bucks out of their pocketbook. And the same thing for eating out in a restaurant. Joseph eating in a restaurant is an interesting experience, and I just hope that the staff get used to doing that and try to do that. Well, they're not going to do it if they're paying it on their dime. But there's a nice little Italian restaurant right around the corner from Joseph's house. Of course, there probably is one anywhere in San Francisco, but he goes in there, and they know what he likes, and he'll pick something off, but they can both eat on my dime, because I'm supplementing it. I think it's only fair for staff. It's kind of the attaboy you get to do. It's a way of reinforcing what we want them to do. You can't ask them to achieve goals on Joseph's IPP and not facilitate it in some financial way.
Okay, I know that there are probably other questions, but we're going to go ahead and take a break now.